and was responsible for highly technical nuclear weapons testing diagnostics work for the Department of Energy. Over the next 26 years, he continued working for EG&G in an ever-increasing role. He ended his EG&G employment in 1995 as Director of the Management Systems Division for the Los Alamos program. In 1996, when the Nevada test site contract was awarded to Bechtel, Nevada, Nelson went to work for Lockheed Martin Nevada Technologies, one of the contract team members. He held a variety of positions, including NTS Operations Manager, Assistant General Manager for Programs, Laboratory Director, and Manager of the Remote Sensing Laboratories, and Assistant General Manager for Diagnostic Experiment Support at the Nevada Test Site, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and Sandia National Laboratory. In 2006, after National Security Technologies, also known as NS Tech, assumed the Nevada test site contract, Nelson managed both the programmatic and operational work supplying diagnostic support to the Nevada test site, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and Sandia National Laboratory for the DOE Stockpile Stewardship Program. In early 2008, Nelson retired from NS Tech and became a casual employee. Nelson holds a master's degree in business administration from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and a bachelor's of science degree in electrical engineering from the University of Arizona. Since his retirement, Nelson and his wife have traveled both in the U.S. and international, primarily to South America. When he is home, he fills his day with working on restoring muscle cars, biking, and supporting the National Atomic Testing Museum. The Cochrans have a grown son, and Nelson's wife is a retired educator and education administrator. Martha manages the National Testing Archive, which houses unclassified information on the U.S. nuclear weapons testing program. In 1979, when the Coordination and Information Center, also known as CIC, was founded, Martha was hired as a staff health physicist. She became a manager in 1989. In 2003, the CIC was renamed the Nuclear Testing Archive. Martha helped to develop the Nuclear Testing Archive and helped to guide it through the technological changes that have occurred over the last 4 decades. The Nuclear Testing Archive has provided data for dose reconstruction projects, has collection soil samples across the western United States, has provided support for radiation-regulated litigations, and has made the archive information and records available to the public. Martha provides subject matter expertise not only on the collection, but also on its contents. Please join me in welcoming Nelson and Martha. And I'd also like to give them each a token of appreciation for being here this morning. So thank you.
Justin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Talk about the museum and the nuclear testing archive. I really talk about a little bit about the history first. There have been over 1,000 nuclear tests conducted by the United States. The atmospheric testing, when we tested above ground, lasted from 1945 to 1962. In 1963, in August, we signed what was called the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which put between the United States and Russia, which didn't allow for atmospheric or stratospheric or underwater testing after that time frame. Our first test was conducted in 1945 during World War II called the Trinity test. We then tested in the Marshall Islands starting in 1946 with Operation Crossroads. We also tested in Johnston Island in 1958 and 62. Sound, which is a United Kingdom territory, in 1962. We tested at the Nevada test site, which is now the Nevada National Security Site, in 1951, 52, 53, 55, 57, 58, and 62 in the atmosphere. The underground testing era lasted from 1961 to 1992. In 1957 and 1958, we conducted some underground testing, and we also conducted through the later time frames the continental test in Mississippi, Central Nevada, Fallon, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and 3 tests on Amchitka, Alaska, which is a part of the evolution chain. In 1958, we had a testing moratorium from November 1st for us to September 15th, 1961. The Russians went back to testing on September 5th, 1961, and we followed after they broke the moratorium on September 15th. And we now have a moratorium that began on September 24th, 1992 to present. Again, the first atomic test was conducted in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. From 45 to 92, 1,029 tests were conducted at various test sites in the Pacific and the National Security Site. Multiple organizations were responsible for records associated with the nuclear testing program. When the program was created and came to Nevada, the program was managed out of Albuquerque and also for a short period of time out of Santa Fe. So the records resided in New Mexico, the laboratory Los Alamos in New Mexico, Livermore in California, and also in Washington, D.C. with the AEC. In 1962, March of 62, the Nevada Operations Office was created, and the records started being accumulated at that point, but that basically was post-atmospheric testing era. Relevant records existed in all different locations, but not really in Nevada. In 1977, the Center for Disease Control conducted a look at the records associated with the Smoky participants. Smoky was a test in 1957 that included the military participation. They looked at the veterans and decided that there was possibly a weak linked correlation between leukemia and the participants. And in January and February of 1978, Congress had a hearing looking at the effects of radiation in human health. This stirred a lot of public interest from the veterans and also from what later became the downwinders. Congress noted that the records were not centralized in any location, and in response to any of these inquiries were going to be slow and often not complete. Congress also noted that historical documents were not readily available, and the public was entitled to access to historical records. As a result of these congressional hearings, the Coordination and Information Center was established in 1979. In January 1979, Nevada Operations Office created a project plan to centralize all the records. In March, the defense programs established DOE Nevada as the lead organization to collect the records. In April, they designated the contractor, Reynolds Electric and Engineering Company, to operate the project which was entitled the Coordination Information Center, which is now the Nuclear Testing Archive. The mission was to collect, preserve, unclassified, and declassified historical documents dealing with the nuclear weapons testing program, establish and maintain an archive for public access, index bibliographic information into a database, provide support to the off-site radiation exposure review program. That was a program to do dose assessment to the off-site residents. We began the collection project in 1979 and began to index the documents. in 1981, the collection, the archive was open to the public. We had a reading room where the public could come in and research the records. To date, we have almost 390,000 documents inventoried into the collection. This gives you an idea of where we collected the records. And came up during our collection process that not all AEC DOE records were actually in the record system. That you had people walking away with records, especially from grantee organizations. You see a doc for Kermit Larson up in Minot, North Dakota. He was a project manager for UCLA for the AEC, and they conducted very, very important studies in the science of radioecology on the uptake and persistence of fallout in the biosphere. We got his collection from him from Minot, North Dakota. You also see in Arizona a C-pometer, that's a claripometer. In 1958, President Eisenhower created the Federal Radiation Council, which determined what the radiation regulations should be, and things like protective action guides. All those things were originated in the Federal Radiation Council and followed on to later regulations we all live with today. Well, he retired down to Arizona, and he was the first chairman of this Federal Radiation Council, and we were able to obtain his records. In 1994, because we had collected this huge collection, the Department of Energy also asked us to coordinate and collect all the records on the Department of Energy's human radiation exposure experimentation records. And the Department of Defense asked us to house their records that they collected. In 1994, the Department of Energy created what was called an openness initiative. And they created a database called OpenEd that resides at Oak Ridge, that they wanted all the DOE sites to put in their bibliographic information on recently declassified information. Our bibliographic database exists on OpenEd, and we get requests from all over the world for information. And in 1997, because we had all done that, DOE decided that they would like us to index and image their full collection of Marshall Islands documents that they created, that they provided the Marshall Islands hard copies, in order to provide the information back to the public of the Marshall Islands, which had become a recently country versus a U.S. territory. In 1997, the DOE decided that we would be the repository for recently declassified nuclear weapons testing films. We have over 100 films in this particular collection, and a lot of them are up on YouTube by individuals who have purchased them from us, and they're available on DVD and Betacam SP. Currently, we have almost 390,000 documents. We only can house unclassified, declassified, or sanitized documents, and we've collected them from over 110 agencies or individuals, and the documents originated from over 1,400 agencies. Now, this gives rise to the birth of the museum, this particular step. We applied for a record schedule in the 1991. In 1997, the National Archives and Records Administration decided on a record schedule. They decided that the CIC collection would be permanent. Even though a lot of the information had been actually copied out of the other locations and declassified, where the original resides as classified information, the collection in its entirety would become permanent because of its unique collection of all this information. At that point, the Department of Energy and Nevada Operations appointed a committee to determine the feasibility of preserving the nuclear testing history and its artifacts. At this point, there was a great effort to actually remove material, structures, and update the test site. So historical artifacts would be lost if they didn't do this. At that point, the Nevada Atomic Testing History Institute, or NAVI, partnered with the Desert Research Institute, which is an arm of the University of Nevada, and the Department of Energy to explore the possibility of combining the Desert Research Institute's cultural support to the Nevada test site and the Coordination Information Center and a museum to display and tell the story of the Nevada test site. The Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation was established as a nonprofit 501c3 entity. There was a memorandum of understanding outlining the functions, roles, and responsibilities, and was signed by the partners of the foundation, Department of Energy, and the Desert Research Institute. They contracted with an architect to draw up plans of the new building, and the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation opened up a temporary exhibit in the North Las Vegas site where the Department of Energy building is. In the year 2000, the History Foundation achieved affiliate status with the Smithsonian Institution. The GSA also signed the lease for the new DRI building. That was an important step in order to ensure the funding to have the building built. In 2002, the groundbreaking ceremony for the new building was conducted. 2003, June, the CRC moved into the new building, and with that move, we changed our names to the Nuclear Testing Archive and moved to our permanent home, the newly completed Frank H. Rogers Science and Technology Building on the Desert Research Institute's DRI campus, 755C East Flamingo Road, Las Vegas. October 2003, there was a grand opening of the new DRI building and a temporary exhibit for the Atomic Testing Museum. February 2005, the grand opening of the Atomic Testing Museum happened. In December 2011, the Atomic Testing Museum was granted the great honor of becoming the National Atomic Testing Museum by order of the U.S. Congress. The NTA, or the Nuclear Testing Archive, provided key documents to the museum. The NTA also provided its radiation detection collection and dosimeter collection on permanent loan, and there's a photograph of the collection. And during the design phase, the NTA provided copies of digitized photos and historical films to the museum. This is an example of a historical document. This is the Einstein letter, which really started off, none of us would be here at all today without this particular letter that started the whole thing. In 1998, I was part of the group that went out to the test site hunting for artifacts. And it was really a fun task to do, to go through these old buildings prior to them being taken down or cleaned out. Key items that were scheduled for access were held and stopped from being accessed. One of the items was they had a farm at the test site EPA ran to study the uptake of radionuclides in the pathway analysis of cattle. And there was a silo that was in the access property access lot. And we spotted that, and I had photographs of this up at this location of the farm. And the access for that property was stopped, and it was transferred to the museum, and that actually had to go into the museum prior to the walls being put up on the building. So straight onto the cement, it was put on there, along with a couple other key large pieces into the museum before the walls were sealed into the building. DOE contacted the various laboratories and asked them if they would like to submit some artifacts. Key items were found in active and inactive buildings and were transferred to the museum. And then individuals got interested and started donating artifacts to the museum. The contractor that was designed and built out the museum, what the original design was J.J. Andres and Associates. And they also assisted with the temporary exhibit. And the permanent museum was opened up in February of 2005, and the temporary exhibit now houses a special exhibit that changed over time. Because of the Nuclear Testing Archive and the museum, now you can tell stories and find out about the history of the testing program. And Nelson will continue on to give you really a highlight of how the National Nuclear Security Site was founded.
Thank you, Martha. Bom dia. Tudo bem? No answer. That's Portuguese for good morning in light of the Olympics, and I just asked how everybody's doing. So, how are you doing? That's better. Everybody's had their coffee. So I'm going to talk about the formation of the Continental Nevada test site. There's lots of words here. Hopefully I won't read a lot of those to you. But you can see it started back right after the end of World War II. The Navy had not participated very much in the development of the nuclear weapons and had actually no operational experience of how they would deal in a battlefield where there were nuclear weapons. So as you can see, right after the Japanese surrendered, there was an effort put forth to do some testing with the Navy to see how they would be able to deal with nuclear weapons in their battle space. In January of 1946, they put together what they called Operations Crossroad. And this was to be 3 tests, one above the surface, one slightly under the surface, and one deep. The three weapons were exactly the one which was dropped on Nagasaki, called Fat Man, which was the plutonium implosion device. They chose to go to Bikini in the Marshall Islands, and they actually moved the Bikinians off that island and relocated them to another island close to their area. As you can see, Bikini is about 2,500 miles from Hawaii. As I say, it's a long way to the hardware store if you forgot something. So this was a huge operation. You can see over 42,000 people. Over 38,000 of those were Navy. They had 95 target ships. You can see the little diagram at the bottom of how they laid those ships out. 140 some support, bunches of airplanes, and they had an international audience. They invited anybody and everybody who wanted to come and watch this. And up at the bottom, the cost of this, and there was only 2 tests, which I'll get into in a second, was around $1.3 billion in today's money. There were 2 tests. Able, which was an airdrop from a B-50, which was an upgraded B-29. And for some unknown reason, they missed the target by about a half a mile. The target was the USS Nevada. It was painted red with a white cross. How you missed it, I don't know. There was a big investigation. They were going to hang these guys when they could figure out how they screwed up. They never did, and the best guess, which is what it was, somehow one of the fins got damaged on the bomb when it came out of the plane, and it didn't glide like they expected to. Anyway, it went off about 1,000 feet in the air. It really didn't cause a lot of damage. Sank about 5 ships out of 95. Nevada survived because they missed it by half a mile. But it really wasn't a big deal. They were able to go back in fairly soon. Decontamination wasn't a big deal. And the Navy's feeling pretty good about this. So that was July 1st, 1946. July 25th, they conducted Baker. Baker was 90 feet under the water, and obviously a watertight container. The bottom of the lagoon there is 180 feet deep. So when Baker went off, and look and see whether you had this column. This is about 2,000 feet across. It goes up about 6,000 feet, and it's a tube. The diameter, the wall of the tube is about 300 to 400 feet thick, and there's about 2 million tons of seawater and sand in that column. And in those days, remember this is 1946, whatever went up came back down. So all that came back down. It formed a huge, what we call a base surge, washed over all the ships, which was okay. It didn't sink many. I think they sank 9 ships on this. But what it did was all that water and all that sand is highly contaminated. So it contaminated all of those ships. And to cut to the chase, they were unable to decontaminate those ships because they really didn't have a plan, and the seawater is contaminated, so they're using contaminated seawater to decontaminate contaminated ships, on and on and on and on. They didn't have a good line established for contamination and non-contamination, so people were tracking contaminations back into the support ships where they're leaving. The seawater systems which run on those ships, obviously they're picking up contaminated seawater. It was just a mess. The bottom line was that their Admiral Blandy was saying, we're really, the Navy worked out for little contaminations, not going to hurt us. And these are pretty high levels. And there was a gentleman on there by the name of Stevenson who was the chief health physicist. He was an Army colonel. And he kept beating up on Blandy about, these people are getting acceptable doses, so on and so forth. But he wasn't getting his attention, so what they did is they went out and caught a fish in the lagoon. And they put that fish with a piece of photo paper and made an audio radiograph. So the fish produced the energy to expose the paper. And when they developed that photo paper, here's a X-ray of the inside of that fish. In fact, the story goes they could tell what that fish had eaten. It was in its stomach. That got the Admiral's attention. So they very quickly folded their tent out of those ships. The vast majority were sunk later on, either at Eniwetok or Bikini. They towed a few back to San Francisco on the West Coast. They were able to decontaminate a few. What they weren't, they towed back, they actually sank out in the Pacific. The third test they canceled. So in 1947, now the military has been running all this. Manhattan Project had Groves, who was a brigadier general. Military is running the nuclear weapons program. Los Alamos is there. But in 1947, it was decided that civilians should really control the nuclear weapons program, or the nuclear weapons development program. So, as you can see, Truman signed the Atomic Energy Act of 1946, went into effect in January 1947. This gentleman here, Wyland Fall, was appointed chairman, and I'll come back to him in a minute, but just remember that name. So the second series was in 1948. It was called Sandstone. And this was the first test of new designs. Los Alamos had been working diligently to come up with new designs to not have so much special nuclear material in it. Give you an example of what it cost. When they built Trinity, which was the first test in down Alamogordo, Mexico, the claim was there was about $1 billion worth of material. That's what it cost to produce the material in that one device. So very, very expensive. They chose to go to anti-weetalk, and this was different in the fact that now the AEC is running the show. But interesting enough, they chose a general to be leader of the task force. And they went to anti-weetalk, and they did the test in about, 3 tests in about a month down there in April and May of '48. They were all on towers located on islands, and you can see the names. If you notice in these series, they're all military names for the alphabet. So here you can see this was not anywhere size of Crossroads, a little over 10,000 people, and only 35 support ships, and this only cost $260 million in today's money. So remember 2 point something, whatever I said before, or 1.3, what I said before, 260, because there's a punchline in this. Okay, when they're in this series, memos started going around saying, boy, this is really expensive, the weather sucks down here, we have very hard time determining what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, we think everything's okay, we do a shot, and then the wind turns around, and they were having a terrible time with that. Obviously, high costs for being so far from any place. And so the idea came up about, well, maybe we could do something closer to home, like on the continent of the United States. Here's what I want you to remember. This guy knew political correctness. Hopefully you can read that. But he essentially said that both the policy and the psychological considerations weighed strongly against the possibility of holding future tests of atomic weapons inside the United States. Blah, 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 blah. He concluded that the commission found it desirable that an initial study of possible sites be conducted, but warned that the dangers inherent with misunderstanding. So here's a guy saying, oh, we don't support it, but geez, if somebody else was to do this, we'd really be interested in the information. So the military put together an organization called Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they were tasked with doing this study. And they called it Project Nutmeg. It was top secret. And they got a captain, a naval captain who was a very experienced meteorologist and spent time in the South Pacific, to go out and see what conditions you needed to be able to have a test site on the U.S. continent. He was to determine the how, when, and where. And he concluded that without fallout, that the fallout would not be detrimental. So he did this, and he came up and said if you had a properly engineered site, an appropriate location, you could do this. The locations he recommended were in the southwest or the humid southeast. You know, he favored the southwest simply because the weather was better, sparse populations, close proximity to Los Alamos, but he was saying Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. The drawback from the southwest, of course, is the winds tentatively blow west to east, and so you would believe blowing contamination and fallout towards populated areas. But he felt, because of distances, that this might be something that you could mitigate. He said somewhere on the East Coast, if the fallout was something that you couldn't deal with, particularly on the Carolina coast between Cape Hatteras and Cape Fear, that's right around Camp Lejeune. If you go out and search in the internet for nuclear testing in that area, you'll find a very interesting article by a newspaper which talks about this. Turns out they really didn't understand the meteorology there, and they've got all sorts of crazy winds blowing. So this would have been a mess. And when we went underground, you're in a very populated area. It was a good thing that they did not go to that area. And so, like I said, it didn't pick a specific area, but just some general locations. So after this was all came about, it was finally decided that this was just too politically charged to go forward with a continental test site, except in a term, a national emergency. And so they took and put Project Nutmeg on the shelf. So the national emergency wasn't long in coming. First, the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb in late August of 1949 called Joe-1. All the intelligence people in the United States said, geez, the Soviets are going to be several years. What they didn't realize that Stalin had 4 aces up his sleeve, Karl Fuchs, Rosenberg, and one other gentleman. And so, like I said, in late August 1949, they tested their first. So the U.S. was no longer the sole holder of nuclear power for a weapon. Second was, there was a big push on to go to the next generation of weapons, thermonuclear. Atomic weapons work on fission, the splitting atoms apart. Thermonuclear work on pushing atoms together. The reason of pushing atoms together is there's a tremendous amount more of energy released when you do that. But it also requires very special conditions. Many millions of degrees, temperature C, and many millions of pounds of pressure, which you generate with a fission device. So this was being pushed primarily by Teller, but in early 50, they got permission to start working on this. And the third thing was the Korean conflict. And that was about in June of 50, and they were getting ready to go down to the South Pacific for Operation Greenhouse. And when they went to the Navy said, we can't support you. We are completely tied up in supporting the Korean conflict. About this time, the Chinese were getting ready to come into this conflict, and the Navy told Department of Energy, National Laboratories, you guys want to go down there, you're on your own, and by the way, we can't guarantee the security in that area right now. So all of a sudden, there was a great need for a continental test site. So they very quickly went over and dusted off Project Nutmeg, and they sent some people out and very quickly determined that there were 5 locations. Talked about most of them, North Carolina. They also looked at the Texas coast down along the Gulf, but that was very quickly discarded. Then dug way up in Utah, El Gordo, and White Sands, and then 2 sites in Nevada, one where the test site is now, and one up north central Nevada. So there was a series of meetings, and there's more documentation you can shake a stick at. The bottom line is they decided that what was part of the Las Vegas bombing and gunnery range, which is associated with the Air Force from World War II, and continued on, was a place to go. Now that size of that bombing and gunning range goes up and down, but it's several thousand square miles, somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 square miles. And they found there was a couple sites on there, as you can see here, the diagram. They had a southern site and a northern site that they were looking at for that. For several reasons, they picked the southern site. And so they went forward and said, we want to withdraw this land. It was 320 square miles from the Nelson bombing and gunnery range. What you see here is the letter that Truman signed in December 18, 1950, withdrawing that land, which was already government land, from Air Force control to the Atomic Energy Commission. He approved Operation Ranger, which was a test series, and a press release to go with that January 5th of 1951. And they actually conducted 5 airdrops from January 27th to February 6, 1951 of these tests that you can see there. Now, think we could withdraw some land in December and conduct tests before the end of January. We probably couldn't even write the document to get somebody to sign. But anyway, they did. And so that's how the test site came about. It was going to be a run on a campaign style like they did in the South Pacific, where they'd all gather up and they'd go out and do their thing, and then they'd all leave, and then while they'd gather up their stuff and go out. Very quickly it became recognized that this should be a permanent site. They might do campaign style, but they would have permanent, they would have permanent facilities and stuff like that. And very quickly it became a year-round area. As you can see here, it has grown from the 320 square miles. It's now about 1,375 square miles, slightly larger than the state of Rhode Island. And the outer beltway of DC can fit inside that area, the test site. Approximately 35 miles wide and about 40 miles north and south. It's had a variety of names. Started out as Nevada Test Site, which very quickly changed to Nevada Proving Grounds, then changed back to Nevada Test Site. In the end of 2010, reflecting a new mission, was changed to the Nevada National Security Site. Questions? You're all ready for the test? Don't you guys have to be certified? Certified and saw this talk? Okay, no questions at all? Okay, way in the back.
When did they start discovering the relationship between EMPs and nuclear weapons?
Between what?
Electromagnetic pulse and nuclear weapons.
That was found when they were in the Pacific. They did a series of tests, high altitude tests. Yeah, it really raised Cain, especially in the South Pacific. I think the highest they sent a device was about 200 miles up, and I don't know whether that's the ionosphere or stratosphere, whatever it is. And that really caused a lot of consternation because it took out any communications that use the ionosphere for several hours because it just completely disrupts it. In fact, there's pictures around, if you go out and look on the internet and stuff like that, when they did some of those tests out in the South Pacific, you can see a glow off of that, and you actually had you actually saw the signatures from those things in the ionosphere. Any other questions? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So did they really have like parties in Las Vegas when they knew something was going to,
Did they have what?
parties or whatever to, you know?
Oh yeah, Las Vegas never misses a beat to take advantage of something. So there's some newspaper headlines around said the U.S. government bombs Las Vegas, but they used to have watch parties. And they would get up early in the morning, and they would go up on top of the hotels, and they would have their Bloody Marys and their mimosas, and sit around and they'd watch the glow in the north. And then everybody said, oh, geez, wasn't that exciting? And then they'd go back downstairs and party. But they actually, the hotels and casinos in Las Vegas actually publicized this and made a big deal out of it, again, to draw people in.
We did some work out there with residents left us, and we drove out there were bleachers that we were told had been stored, I don't know, but there were bleachers that were on the hill. Deteriorated, you could still see them, and we were told people would sit there and watch the testing be done.
Absolutely, a true story. There's several sets of bleachers. Test site has 4 main areas for testing to be done. Frenchman, which is in the south, there's a mountain range in between them. Yucca is kind of in the north, and they do some testing in a ridge line where we do horizontal tunnels. And then we go up an area in the far north where we do the larger tests. Largest test ever conducted at a test site underground was one called Boxcar 1968, 1.3 megatons underground. Produces quite a ground motion. But anyway, they built these bleachers. The first set of bleachers were built 1951 for the Ranger Series, so that they could look out over the Frenchman Flat, and they could see them. People sat there, and you'll see pictures around of people sitting, and they all have these goggles on, which are very, very high-density filters. Makes welding goggles look like they're clear glass. And they could sit there and watch them. They were 7 or 8 miles away. So at about, sound moves about 1,000 feet a second, so 35 seconds later they would finally hear the sound and they would feel the blast, because blast wave, air blast leaves very quickly, but it slows down. There's another set of bleachers out. 1952, they invited the public in the news media to attend a test out in Yucca, and they built a large set of bleachers out there, and this was called News Knob, KNOB, and so that's where they are. And I know at least one other set of bleachers which was associated with Grable, which was the atomic cannon test infringement. So they told me exactly right. They're a national historical, whatever, not a monument, but location. So we hope they never fall down. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So the Baker that got underwater tested, but is there any kind of like a tsunami or anything that got created by that?
Yeah, well, they actually said that this base surge started out about 900 feet tall. But it quickly dissipated. So by the time it got to the edge of the lagoon, it was a few tens of feet at the most. So, and they're in the lagoon. If you look at that map, it's pretty well surrounded. There's openings and stuff like that, but pretty well contained. So if you want to say there was a local tsunami, yeah, you could, but not really. What it did do is it did make a crater in the bottom, and I forget the dimensions, 90 feet across, and 10 feet deep or something like that.
When was the last weapons test?
The last weapons test was a event called Divider by Los Alamos, September 23rd, 1992. Thought you'd stump me, didn't you? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So in the archives themselves, is that fully, I didn't catch it, is that a fully digitized collection now, or is it also paper?
The collection with project started in 1979, and everything was backed up on microfilm. We began imaging in 1990 specific collections. And so as customers asked for the previous stuff, the unimaged stuff, it gets imaged and added to the database as it's requested, because that's the same cost as basically Xeroxing, but you do it once and you save it forever. And we stopped providing paper to customers around 1997. Our paper copy, a page, at that time cost 25 cents a page. And we provide the public with a huge savings. We allow them, if the documents are small enough, we can email them for free. For 100 documents, if they ask us, we charge them $2 for the CD plus shipping and handling, which is $4. So they could get 100 documents for $6. And if they had asked for the paper copies of those, it could be $4,000 or $5,000 worth of request. And so nobody asks for paper anymore. They're given the choice. And now the National Archives, which we based our paper cost on, charges 90 cents a page. So you can tell that nobody wants paper because of the prohibitive cost. Any other questions?
Did anybody ever get their arms around over the course of the atmosphere testing time frame, what total mortality was as a direct result of that testing?
The National Academy of Sciences was funded to look at the veterans' participation in nuclear testing. And they had a report specifically on the mortality associated with Crossroads, and then they looked at 5 different series later to look at mortality associated with that, and provided the information on the statistics, and the probabilities are very, very low for cancer. And cancer mortality to begin with is very high. About 20% of the population dies of cancer, and 1 in 4 get cancer in their lifetime. So it's very, very difficult to tell the difference between what is induced from the exposure from nuclear tests versus normal incidence of cancer. So those reports are available for free viewing on the National Academy Press website. If you look for mortality crossroads and quote 5 series study, you will find both of those studies. And they've also looked extensively at dose reconstruction methodology that the DoD uses, and made scientific comments and requests for improvement in those areas which were responded to. So that information is publicly available. That was one of the reasons why there ended up being laws created for compensation. First, there were compensation laws, several compensation laws for the veterans, both presumptive and non-presumptive compensation programs through the VA for the veterans based on 22 type cancers. And then the Downwinders Compensation Act, which is the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA Act of 1990, was passed in 1990, which compensates downwinders, on-site participants, and uranium miners for the 22, 23 types of cancers that are presumptive. So if you have that type of cancer and you improve your participation or your residency in specific locations that are approved for the program, you are compensated. And then in the year 2000, the Occupational Illness Compensation Act was passed for the Department of Energy, operated by the Department of Labor, to compensate on-site workers, again, in other DOE sites for the presumptive cancers, beryllium exposure, asbestos exposure, and other toxic exposures through their program. So it's more encompassing than the previous ones to include non-radiogenic diseases. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going back to the records question. So you digitized specific collections.
Yes.
Did you throw away the paper?
Oh, no.
So your hard copy is still your record copy?
The hard copy for those image collections are the record copy. For the other portions of the collection, NIRMA designated the microfilm as the record copy.
Oh, okay. Right. Because
So,
you're fully microfilm.
We have microfilm. And we've been digitizing microfilm as we needed to.
Yeah,
Some of our collection is microfilm only. We purchased specific microfilm from the Public Health Service. They had a fairly vast collection. They were tasked in 1978, 79 to look through all their archives for information on health effects from radiation, specifically nuclear weapons. And they microfilmed all the documents that they collected. And so we purchased their index and the copies of all their microfilm to put into our collection. So we're very, very experienced in digitizing microfilm.
See, my question is going to be more of that. If you were, so again, this is the national treasure now. This is an archive of national consequence. Into the future, when you foresee the future, do you see migrating the microfilm more to digital? Do you see migrating the film to better film? What's the plan for sustainability going forward?
we will continue to digitize microfilm. We had a lot of microfilm digitized during a project. But we will maintain the microfilm because it is, has long life expectancy.
Correct.
And the electronic copy has to be carefully shepherded through the future. That's something that requires a lot of funding and responsibility down the road. And the microfilm could just sit there, basically, and be easily preserved. So the microfilm is a tremendous, that has tremendous value as being a fail-safe. We have microfilm copies of our collection at the DOE historian's office and headquarters, and also with a DOE contractor in Virginia. So we not only have 2 sets here in separate locations, but we have sets back east. So the collection is well protected in multiple media, which, you know, I can't think of any other kind of collection that has that kind of protection.
Have you looked at the film, inspected it all, sampled it for readout?
The microfilm? Yeah, we use it all the time. And the only thing that, of the microfilm that has become a problem is actually the leaders get brittle over time. Microfilm itself is great. We haven't had, some of the microfilm that dates back to 1977, 78. And we have not had any problems with it at all.
When you say you use it, you've never seen it, did you actually inspect it?
Yes. And again, it's kept in, Nevada is an ideal location for an archive. It is very dry, and we keep it cool. So humidity control is natural here. I once went on a retrieval trip to the President Kennedy's Presidential Library. It's on the bay in Boston. And we worked up in the classified vault. And part of working up there was we were handed a stapler with archival staples in it. And with the instructions of every file we went through, remove the staples and replace them as a condition to work in there. Again, this was in the 1990s, and these records had not been touched since 1964, basically, when they were boxed up. And when we opened up the folders, there was rust on the paper, damage from the moist salt humidity of that location. So we are extremely blessed by where we are located. So I highly recommend Nevada as any kind of archive storage location. It's just ideal. Our paper copies are also in fabulous condition. Again, they've been on the shelf since 1979. They're kept in acid-free folders and acid-free boxes. We use Hollinger as our vendor, and they look great. The only problem we have are the exterior labels. The glue goes away. So label replacement on the exterior box is the huge problem with our collection.
The problem with paper here in Arizona and Nevada is that it gets too dry and it actually disintegrates over time like this. So the longevity of it is in question. I've already seen that for over 30 years in your district of Alberta.
Any kind of paper that's thermal paper, or one of our huge problems is Velox. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember Velox paper. Is it? It's a very, very waxy paper, thermal imaging, and you don't have much opportunity to copy this. It's basically a one-shot deal on putting it on a flatbed to scan it. The paper is very, very brittle. You cannot feed it, or you'd end up with a shredder. You know, the paper, and it has a very waxy feel to it. So once you it's very noticeable. It's very, very dark. It doesn't age well. The ink lightens and it almost disappears. So you better get your one-shot deal very well on copying that piece of paper.
Sleeve. Sleeve.
Thank you very much for your kind attention. You've been a great audience. And by the way, I'll turn it as you all passed the test with flying colors. If you're interested in going to the museum, we are supposed to have a booth in the vendor area, which you have here this afternoon. Our executive director is supposed to be there, and our education director. And welcome to talk to them, and I think they can make you a great deal for getting to the museum. Thank you.